Communipaw were talked and smoked over. In fact, it was in this very building that Olaf, the dreamer, and his companions concerted that great voyage of discovery and colonization, in which they explored Buttermilk Channel, were nearly shipwrecked on the Straits of Hellgate, and finally landed on the island of Manhattan, where they founded the great city of New Amsterdam.
Even after the province was cruelly wrested from the sway of their high mightinesses by the combined forces of the British and Yankees, this tavern continued its ancient loyalty.
It is true, the head of the Prince of Orange disappeared from the sign. A strange bird being painted over it, with the explanatory legend of the Wilderdans, or the wild goose.
But this, all the world knew to be a sly riddle of the landlord, the worthy Turnus van Giesen, a knowing man in a small way, who laid his finger beside his nose and winked whenever anyone studied the signification of his sign and observed that his goose was hatching and would join the rest of the flock whenever they flew over the water. An enigma which was the perpetual recreation and delight of the loyal but fat-headed burghers of Communipaw.
Under the sway of this patriotic, though discreet and quiet publican, the tavern continued to flourish in primeval tranquility, and was the resort of all true-hearted Netherlanders from all parts of Pavonia who met here to smoke and drink the downfall of Britain and Yankee and success to Admiral Von Trump.
The only drawback on the comfort of the establishment
was a nephew of mine host, a sister's son, Jan Joost van der Scamp by name, and a real scamp by nature.
This unlucky Webster showed an early propensity to mischief, which he gratified in a small way by playing tricks upon the frequenters of the wild goose.
Putting gunpowder in their pipes, squibs in their pockets, and astonishing them with an explosion while they sat nodding around the fireplace in the barroom.
And if perchance a worthy burgher from some distant part of Pavonia had lingered until dark over his potation, it was odds that young Vanderskamp would slip a briar under his horse's tail as he mounted, and send him clattering along the road in nectar-nothing style to his infinite astonishment and discomfiture.
May we wonder that why mine host of the wild goose did not turn such a graceless varlet out of doors.
But Turnus van Giesen was an easy-tempered man, and having no child of his own, looked upon his nephew with almost parental indulgence. His patience and good nature were doomed to be tried by another inmate of his mansion.
This was a cross-grained curmudgeon of a Negro named Pluto, who was somewhat of an enigma in Communipaw. Where he came from, nobody knew.
He was found one morning after a storm, cast like a sea monster on the strand in front of the wild goose, and lay there more dead than alive. The neighbors gathered round and speculated on this production of the deep, whether it were fish or flesh, or a compound of both, commonly called a merman. The kind-hearted Turnus van Giesen, seeing that he wore the human form, took him into the house and warmed him into life.
By degrees, he showed signs of intelligence and uttered sounds very much like language, but which no one in Communipaw could understand. Some thought him a Negro who had either fallen overboard or escaped from a slave ship. Nothing, however, could ever draw from him the account of his origin.
When questioned on the subject, he merely pointed to Gibbet Island a small rocky islet which lies in the bay just opposite Communipaw, as if that were his native place, although everybody knew it had never been inhabited.
In the process of time, he acquired something of the Dutch language. That is to say, he learned all its vocabulary of oaths and maledictions, with just words sufficient to string them together.
Thunder and Blitzen! Thunder and lightning were the gentlest of his ejaculations.
For years, he kept about the wild goose, more like one of those familiar spirits or household goblins that we read of, than like a human being. He acknowledged allegiance to no one, but performed various domestic offices when it suited his humor, waiting occasionally on the guests, grooming the horses, cutting wood, drawing water, and all this without being ordered. Lay any command on him, and the stubborn sea urchin was sure to rebel.
He was never so much at home, however, as when on the water, flying about in his skiff or canoe, entirely alone, fishing, crabbing, or grabbing oysters.
And would bring home quantities for the larder of the wild goose, which he would throw down at the kitchen door with a growl.
No wind nor weather deterred him from launching forth on his favorite element. Indeed, the wilder the weather, the more he seemed to enjoy it. If a storm was brewing, he was sure to put off from shore, and would be seen far out in the bay, his light skiff dancing like a feather on the waves, when sea and sky were all in a turmoil, and the stoutest ships were fain to lower their sails.
Sometimes on those occasions he would be absent for days together.
How he weathered the tempest, and how and where he subsisted, no one could define, nor did anyone venture to ask, for all had an almost superstitious awe of him.
Some of the